Good morning. Welcome to UUCC, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. We are a group of spiritual freethinkers who gather to celebrate life, build community, and better the world. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. I'm Karen Alvarez, your worship associate for this morning, and our service will be led by Nancy Reed and Marie Brown. The service is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel, and we are planning on continuing with hybrid worship services throughout the church year. So you can join us each week here in person, on Zoom, or later on YouTube if you prefer. If this is your first visit, welcome. We invite you to sign the visitor's book in the entryway. And whether it's your first visit or your 100th, we're glad that you came. I have a few announcements to share with you today. Please wear a mask. Masks are available for anyone who forgot. RE and child care will be provided this morning by Michelle Chapla and Kaya Mills. We will be collecting cards for joys and sorrows after our first hymn. Please fill them out or type into the chat box on Zoom if you have something you would like to share. Join us at our worship Zoom link from 12 to 12:30 on Wednesdays in Lent for a meditation series focused on discernment through creativity. So I have a few announcements today. After the service, Team 6 will be holding a roadside cleanup for our stretch of adopted highway out on 5 and 20. Friday, April 7th, we will have a joint Tenebrae service here at UUCC and joined by First Unitarian and First Universalist at 7 p.m. Saturday, April 8th at 10 a.m., we will have a free Easter egg hunt for church families and the community. All are welcome. And next Sunday, April 9th, will be a potluck. Please bring a dish or just yourself, however works. And we are still planning a nearly new sale in early May. Put your things in your basement or in your garage, both like I did. And we will get you some information about when to bring that here and the times and stuff. Are there any other announcements for the good of the community?
I have a pledge drive update. We hope to be finished with our pledge drive by today, but as I think back over the years, we're never done with our pledge drive on the target date, so don't worry. As you can see from our graphic, we are approaching the abundance that we seek. $65,000 has been pledged. Yeah, way to go. Yay. Only 5.5 fish to go. In dollar terms, that's $11,000. There are a few pledges we think will still come in, and perhaps a loaves and fishes phenomenon that Eileen preached about in her pledge drive kickoff sermon will materialize. In any case, thank you to all who have pledged. Every pledge gets us closer to our goal. And appropriately enough, the newly formed energetic and enthusiastic fundraising committee is meeting after our service today. Your donations of time, talent, and money are all appreciated. Thank you.
As we prepare to be fully together, I remind you to silence your phones and devices. We now enter a space of worship. I invite you to join with me in our chalice lighting words as the flame is lit. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Hi. A few months ago, take this off. A few months ago, Reverend Eileen offered a workshop on writing a sermon. She suggested that we each bring with us a book or a story that we think has something to teach, and to use that book as the basis for a sermon. So I looked around for one, and I found it when I was volunteering at Canandaigua's Comfort Care Home, Light Hill. It was in a small pile of books in the comfortable, homey living room at Light Hill. Books about losing and books about loving. The name of the book is Tear Soup. And it's the story of how an old and somewhat wise woman, whom people called Grandy, she has just suffered a big loss in her life. And it's the story of what she did with all the tears that she had. Grandy began to make tear soup. Now, you probably know that most cooking requires a recipe and exact measurements, but that's not true for soup. Making soup is different. Making soup is an art, and you are the artist. Improvising as you go, putting in what you need to put in and taking all the time that you need. Your only goal is that the blended creation will both satisfy your hunger and soothe what hurts you. Last week, we had a wonderful talk about healthcare chaplaincy, if you were here or if you've heard it, given by Reverend Kelly Spar. Reverend Kelly has the training to be supportive and helpful to people who are in crisis. But many of us may find ourselves wanting to know the right thing to say or to do, to be helpful to people we care about who are having a rough time. If you're like me, you might wish sometimes for the kind of training that Reverend Kelly had. Maybe following Grandy's story today will help a little and give you some cooking tips to make that tear soup, whether you are the cook or your friend is the cook.
Our opening hymn today is number 18, What Wondrous Love. Please rise in body or spirit as you are willing and join us to sing.
We are a community that holds one another in our celebrations and in our pain. We welcome you to share your joys and sorrows by writing them down on the card you found in your chair and placing them in the basket when it comes by, or by typing it into the chat box in Zoom. Know that whatever your heart is holding today, shared or not, we are with you.
Well, this is the time we usually tell a story, and I'll be telling another story later. But I thought you might have a story out there if someone would like to share, because I think that the feeling of grief that we're going to be talking about is a lot like the feeling of being lost. Did anyone ever get lost? Marty Dodge, you got lost? Do you want to tell us briefly about getting lost?
I certainly could. I was hiking
A microphone?
in the.
Can Marty get to a microphone?
Thank you.
I can find the microphone.
We have it.
Well, I was hiking in the Adirondacks and decided to take an alternative route. The trail was pretty well marked, but I thought I knew that well enough, and it was a nice section that went along a lake, and I thought I might find some things of interest. I like to go collect ponds. And I had a compass. The next thing I knew, nothing looked right. And it was cold and wet and rainy. And I was getting a little concerned. And I hiked for quite a while and still did not refine the trail that I thought I could find. And time went on, it got colder, rainier, and I got more miserable. And I scratched my head, what should I do? Should I stop and build a fire? And I said, no, I'll keep going. And lo and I found the trail finally, and it was what a relief it was. And I knew from that point there was a lean-to up ahead, not too far. And I got to that in great relief. And in the back left-hand corner of the lean-to was a pile of birch bark, twigs, fuel, and the essence of an instant fire. And I lit the birch bark and I got the fuel on it and I started to warm up and thought the best part about that was I was the one who had left that life-saving bit of fuel in the corner of the lean-to about 6 months ago. And being lost was a tragedy, but finding myself in a place that I was comfortable with was a true joy.
Thank you. Anyone else ever get lost? Any of the kids? Did you? Where did you get lost? Oh my. How did you find your way home? Daddy find you?
I found my daddy on
That's great. Anybody else have a story of getting lost? It's not too uncommon, yeah? Thank you. It's not fun being lost. The path that you thought you were on, you just took for granted, and you knew where you were going and what your next step was going to be, and then something changes suddenly. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about those feelings. And now, time for the offering.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts of both time and money support our church in its work. Each week, we would like to spotlight a group or committee and thank them for the gift of their time. This week, I want to spotlight Soul Matters. Sometimes we call it small groups. It is the opportunity to explore various seasonal topics, kind of more in-depth in a much more intimate setting. We do have people who are facilitating them, and you are welcome to reach out to Reverend Eileen if you're interested in facilitating, or if you're just interested in participating. 1/4 of our collection plate for the muddy season goes to Call to Care Canandaigua, an organization working toward the goal of welcoming refugees into our community. You can give to this morning's offering by placing cash or a check into the basket, or by one of the options on your screen. Please make a note that your gift is intended for today's offering. We now gratefully accept the offering. So we have a couple of joys and sorrows today. From someone who did not leave their name. On April 11th, I'm going to the new Mario movie in the theaters. Peter would like to share that his friend Paul is in the hospital spending his last days. And Debbie's spirit is still with me. Elliot would like to share that he got some squishmallows for his birthday, and he loves the elephant. So I'm going to now drop the stone for these and all the joys and sorrows left in the silence of our heart. Whatever is in your heart today, we are with you. At this time, if there are any children, which there's a lot, who would like childcare and some RE, please go downstairs with Kaya and Michelle.
No, I think whether we talk about grief much or not, I'm guessing it's becoming quite a relatable topic these days. It's the process you go through as you adjust to the loss of anything or anyone important in your life. The loss of a job, a move, a divorce, the death of someone you love. As we get older, we may grieve a change in our bodies, in our health status. It seems to me our ability to navigate these losses, these endings, is becoming a more necessary skill. There are so many tragedies in the news that just break our hearts and make us anxious about what the future could bring. The COVID pandemic has brought death closer for all of us. The statistics of cases and hospitalizations and deaths are ever present. Most of us have never lived through a war or a pandemic before. Death has come now to dominate our lives in a way that we haven't ever faced. At Light Hill, at the hospice where I volunteer, we get to know the grief of families we care for. We hear their life stories. We provide comfort. And we learn some lessons that might help us to be less overwhelmed when we will have our own losses to navigate. Helping me tell my story today is Marie Brown, I'm delighted to announce. She is the volunteer coordinator at Light Hill. Sadly, she's had serious losses in her own life, and her personal history, as well as the work that she's doing now at Light Hill, have made her wise beyond her years. She is starring today as Grandy. So here is the story of Tear Soup. Maybe some of you went to the show at Fort Hill a month or so ago where there was a woman telling a story, and it was a cooking metaphor. Well, this is another cooking metaphor. So here we go. This is the story of Grandy. She has just suffered a big loss in her life. Pops is her husband. He suffered the same loss too, but in his own way. This is the story of how Grandy faced her loss by setting out to make tear soup. Because of her great loss, Grandy knew that her recipe would call for a big pot. With the big pot, she would have plenty of room for all that needed to go into that soup. All the misgivings, all the memories, all the feelings, all the tears that needed to stew in that pot over time. She put on her apron because she knew it was going to get messy. It seems that grief is never clean. People feel misunderstood, feelings get hurt, wrong assumptions are made all over the place. And to make matters worse, grief always takes longer to cook than anybody wants it to. And then Grandy started to cry. At first she sobbed, Sometimes she wept quietly, and sometimes when she was in a safe place where no one could hear her, she even wailed. Grandy knew she had to make much of this part of the soup, all these tears, herself. She learned from past experiences that most people don't like being around tears. Her friends would worry if they knew just how many tears Grandy's recipe called for this time. So the old and somewhat wise woman reflected on her own special recipe as she looked down into the large, overflowing pot of memories. It was a task she would repeat many times during the next few months. She winced when she took a taste of this broth that was mostly tears. It was bitter. And she knew that this is where she had to start. For now, it was the only thing on her menu. There were so many memories of the person she had lost, so many things Grandy didn't want to forget. Good times and bad times, silly and sad times. With her arms full of memories, Grandy made many trips to the kitchen. One at a time, she slowly stirred in all the precious memories and not so precious memories into the pot on the stove. But eventually, she ran out of things to add. Grandy's arms ached and she felt stone cold and empty. No words could describe the pain she was feeling. What's more, when she looked out her kitchen window, she was kind of surprised to see that the rest of the world was going on as usual, while her world had stopped. She had some visitors. Her grandson Chester would come by sometimes. He just wanted his Grandy to be happy again and hoped his chocolate candy would make her feel better. Brave but fearful friends would drop by to see how she was doing. They filled the air with words, but none of the words took the smell of the soup away. Grandy was gracious, knowing how helpless they felt. They wanted to fix her, but they couldn't. All Grandy needed from them at that moment was a knowing look and a warm hug. There were also days when Grandy hungered for a thoughtful ear. Sometimes she would call out to someone and ask, "Care to join me in a bowl of tear soup?" No thanks," they would reply. "I don't have time for tear soup today." Even some of Grandy's best friends hurried past her house and pretended not to notice the aroma of tear soup coming through her open door. She found that most people can only tolerate a small cup of someone else's tear soup, someone else's sadness. That giant bowl of tears, where Grandy could repeatedly share her sadness in great detail, was left for a few willing friends. And one of them was named Midge. Midge was an old friend who showed up one day, apologizing, "I got here as fast as I could, and I'll be here whenever you need me. What a tragedy. I'm so sorry you're having to make such a big pot of soup." What a relief. Grandy knew she didn't have to be careful what she said around Midge. Midge wouldn't try to talk her out of anything she was feeling. And Grandy could even laugh and not worry that Midge would assume Grandy was over her grief. "I don't know what to say," Midge said tenderly. "Come on. Tell me about it while we make some bread together to go along with your soup." And these two friends who had shared 1,000 laughs and just as many tears pounded and pounded on that bread dough together. If you've made dough, you know what that's like. It can be cathartic. I feel like I'm unraveling, Grandy cried. I'm mad, I'm confused, I can't make decisions. Nobody can make me feel good. I'm a mess. I just didn't realize it would be this hard. Well, Madge suggested, why don't we go for a walk while we wait for the bread to rise? Well, I know exercise is supposed to help me, but I feel like I have concrete blocks strapped to my legs. We better not go too far or you'll have to carry me home, said Grandy. And then there's Mrs. Cries-a-Lot, who would call on the phone. Mrs. Cries-a-Lot had been making her own tear soup for years. She called to say she would be happy, more than happy, to come and show Grandy how to make it the right way. To her, Grandy answered, thanks, but no. This pot has my name on it. She found that adding comfort food to the pot helped to get past that lump in her throat. Sometimes it was mashed potatoes. Sometimes it was ice cream. Sometimes it was chocolate. After all, it's her soup. She and Pops had been married a long time. They knew each other's grieving. Each other's tear soup would be different. She didn't tell him how to make his, and she knew that she couldn't make it for him. And they kept attending their church together, even though Grandy was mad at God. Sometimes she yelled at God and asked why this happened. And sometimes she demanded to know where God was when she was feeling so all alone. Still, Grandy trusted God. She just didn't understand God. She sensed that people believed that if she really had faith, she would be spared deep sorrow, anger, and loneliness. But Grandy kept reminding herself to be grateful for all the emotions that God had given her. Friends would ask her, how long is this going to take? You've been at this for months now. Time to get out of the kitchen. Grandy only wanted to be home. Making this tear soup was hard work. Sometimes it was all she could think about. Even the things she used to love to do, she didn't have the energy for, nor did she care about anymore. She was exhausted. Grandy did look forward to the mail every day, though. She sure didn't want those sympathy cards to stop coming. And then one day, Grandy heard that a neighbor had had a loss and was making her own tear soup. Between them, they knew several others who were also grieving. So Grandy called and invited them all to a special soup gathering. They were told to bring your own soup, and they were reassured that it's not bad manners to cry in your soup or to have two helpings. These thoughtful cooks sat at Grandy's table together and talked about their own experiences. They shared stories they hadn't dared tell anyone else for fear of being judged a bad cook. They could even laugh sometimes without having that misunderstood. And sharing stories helped. And time passing helped. And then one day, Grandy began to have a little more energy. So she and her grandson Chester went out for a drive on a beautiful day. Chester had been quiet and thoughtful on the ride, but he finally asked, Grandy, Mom says you've been making tear soup. What does she mean? And Grandy found that she could explain about the need to slowly sort through all of her feelings and memories, and said, some days when you're making tear soup, it's hard to breathe. And some days you feel like running away. And then comes one of the hardest parts. It's when you decide it might be okay to eat something instead of soup all the time. And the next day, as Grandy was cleaning up the kitchen, Chester asked her if she was done making tear soup. Well, she said, I don't think you actually ever finish, but the hard work of making this batch is almost done. I'll put the rest in the freezer and pull it out from time to time. And Chester said, Grandy, you know so much. What will I do after you die? Don't worry, she said. I'll leave you the recipe. You probably recognize that as Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. You might not know that when he wrote it to express feelings he had sitting next to the bedside of someone who was dying. It wasn't till 100 years or so after his death that it was renamed Moonlight Sonata. So thank you, Bill. I hope Grandy's story gave you some things to reflect on. Sometimes Grandy wanted to be alone. Sometimes she sought out someone to talk to. What was helpful one moment wasn't helpful in the next. She learned to trust what felt right for her. Grief has no time frame. While it often lessens with time, significant losses will likely have an enduring impact. Grief includes sadness, but it can also include many other emotions, such as guilt and anger, self-doubt, and jealousy. Even positive emotions such as joy, gratitude, and hope may be part of the grief experiences. I have to tell you, we see that at Light Hill, all of those things with the families that are there. Acknowledging someone's grief through a kind word or a hug is a powerful way to offer support and human connection. Better than giving advice, and better than ignoring the issue. Your presence is often the best thing you can offer someone else. Allow yourself to be affected by their pain, and remind them how much you care, and be sensitive to their needs and wishes. Listen when they want to talk, and take their hand when they are ready to take that first step out of the wilderness. Thank you. And we're going to sing the same hymn that was our last hymn last week, because when I heard it about kindness and helping your neighbor, I thought it would be perfect again for this week. It's one we don't know real well, so maybe we'll get to know it a little better. It's in the Teal hymnal, and it's number 1012.
Please join me in our words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.